Hey guys, this is Veronica with Oh Happy Plants, and I'm just going to do a little tutorial today about potting up Hoya cuttings. And I have, I don't know, maybe 13 varieties of Hoya right now, and I'm starting to branch out into the the less common varieties. I don't want to call them especially rare, but they are less frequently available and they're certainly more expensive. So I'm not one of those people. So let me just say, if you don't have any rare plants, don't feel bad. Just buy what you love, and if you can't afford it, wait for a cutting to come up for free or something like that. I'm not one of those plant snobs at all. I like to have plants that I absolutely adore, and if I can't stop looking at a plant and I really, really, really want it, like monsteras, the variegated monsteras, don't do it for me. I have a normal monstera and I like it. It's one of my favorites just because of how I'm looking at it over there in the window. They're very tenacious. I love them because of their aerial roots. They're just really interesting plants. But do I need a variegated one? Not right now. I mean, I may take one eventually. I may get one eventually. I believe I was offered a node recently because the node was just not growing. And so sure, I'll try that just to see if I can, figure out the best way to get it going so I can pass that information on. But that's really my drive there, is to give you guys some good information and just play around. But then after I grow it, like, am I going to keep it? Don't know. I do think they're cool, so I'm not knocking them. I just think that their whole rare plant craze, a lot of people get on that because, just because we all like to have something special, and for me, it's as much about, the plant maybe is special, but really, like, am I totally obsessed with it? Like, am I going to dote on that plant? If the answer is yes, it's one of those things that sparks joy. It's going to continue to, as long as I have a really great place for it in my home, then sure, go ahead, but I'm not quite to the point of spending like $500 on a single plant. But anyway, part of the reason is because my house looks like this everywhere. Like, it's plants all over the place, so I don't have more space for them. So back to our topic for the day, the Hoya propagation. So I see a lot of people start them in, like, I've seen folks start them in like a tray of perlite with I think somebody even had like a fish tank bubbler in it to oxygenate the water. And I see people start them just like in a little propagation station. I see people just like in straight water. I see people start them in leca. I see people start them in just like perlite and also sphagnum moss, stuff like that. And then with the moss, like, the Hoya roots are super grippy. I'll show you with a cutting in a minute. So they grab onto the moss. And then I've also heard that if you leave that alone, if you leave those roots attached to the moss, the moss will rot, and then it'll rot the roots. And so I look at all of this and I'm like, okay, so what we know about plants is they develop this massive network of root hairs. And if there's any kind of mycorrhizae in the soil, the beneficial kind, which I put in my soils, if there's any of that, then that creates this kind of web too within the soil. And all of that functions to pull water and nutrients in. And the mycorrhizae also will help to break down nutrients. And even the roots will slough off extra cells, I'm learning. And those cells will decompose and feed the bacteria that break down the nutrients into something the plant can still absorb, And so like, there's this whole system going on with the root system. And if we go in and disrupt it after we root a plant up, then it has to start over. And it has to recolonize that soil with root hairs. And so I prefer to not disrupt what should be naturally happening. And so that's why, like, if I get a plant and it's in really crappy soil, I will wash the roots with water. So I try to disrupt the roots as little as possible. Just use a hose spray to get that off, a gentle spray of a hose to get all the excess soil off. And then I pot it up really gently. And then I do not take that soil off as long as it's really good soil. I don't take it off. I'll add more soil on the top and I'll repot it in a bigger pot if it's necessary and just put more around the root ball. But I don't take that soil off because it's doing its thing in there. Like, all of the roots are colonized in there, and as long as those roots stay healthy and don't get any kind of fungal infection, then we are good. Sorry, there was somebody at my door. Anyway, Amazon delivery or something, who knows. So today we're talking about Hoya propagation and how I do Hoyas across the board, no matter what Hoya I get, I stick them in soil. So what I did with this guy, I got a string of, this is Hoya australis Lisa, and it's a real beauty. I love him. I got just one string, one cutting. It had 4 nodes. I clipped those nodes, and see, I clipped them really close to the node on one side, and then the other side I stuffed down in the soil. So then I take this is my tropical climber mix. It's super chunky, so there's a lot for the roots to grip on. It also drains really well, and it has plenty of nutrients in there. And I dip the end into rooting hormone, and this is just something that I like to do because it makes it, like, the whole process happen faster, and that will stimulate the root growth. And then I stuff them down to the soil, and then I just wait. A lot of people will tell you to tug on the cutting, and that will tell you if there are roots attached, because if you tug on it gently and it does not come out, then that means there are roots and it's well rooted. But the issue there is if you tug on it and there are teeny baby roots just forming, they all of a sudden get ripped out of their home and have to regrow all those root hairs again. And so tugging on them to see if they're fully rooted is not the best idea. I used to do it that way, and then I kind of started thinking about it, and I also noticed that, like, if I yank on them and they're a little bit rooted and then they come loose, then all of a sudden they start growing a little slower. Like, those cuttings would take longer to begin their new leaf growth. And I'm just not interested in screwing with my plants that way, you know? So this is what I do. I got this guy, I want to say last week, and I just stuck him in here, and we are just going to wait. And you're going to notice that the leaves will get a little bit more flexible. They may look a little bit wilted, but typically Hoyas will come back from this. They are survivors. And so let me just tell you, when a Hoya doesn't get enough water, which when it's rooting, it has no roots, so it can't pull water in, it will just kind of hunker down, and it will do the best thing for it, which is to try to shut down any kind of growth processes, except the one, which is growing roots, the one process that it needs to do to be able to get back to normal, which is growing a good root system. So when you pot up cuttings and you wait, like, they're not doing anything, you're really impatient, you want to take the soil apart, see what's going on in there, don't do that. Just wait, like, 2-3 months, 4 months maybe. And as long as you're giving the Hoya the right conditions, which is great light and not super bright or direct when they're rooting, because you don't want them to be using too much moisture, but great light so they can photosynthesize, plenty of water. You want to keep the soil medium moist, and that actually will signal the roots to grow along the stem by keeping that stem moist. And then you just wait. And as long as you wait long enough without disrupting those roots, eventually you're going to notice little bits of sprouts coming out. And that is how you know that your plant is well rooted. Hoyas are total survivors. I love them because of this. When they are stressed or going through a drought, they just shut down leaf growth entirely. And then once you water them again, you know, or once they grow roots, like in this case, then they'll start growing leaves again. And that's how you know they're really well rooted. And again, disrupting the roots during the rooting process is, for me, a giant no-no, because it just messes with things and makes everything take longer. So about the wilt. These Lisas, like, I was really careful getting a very fresh cutting on this one. It had just been cut, like, when I knocked on the door of this woman's house. Like, I was super appreciative that she waited to cut it, because this guy is a really thin leafed Hoya. It's very flexible already, and the thinner leafed Hoyas are not going to hold quite as much water. Therefore, they have less water to get them through the rooting process. Whereas the really thick-leaved Hoyas have a little bit more wiggle room, you know, like the carnosas and stuff like that. So this guy, I was very careful to get a super fresh cutting, so it hadn't been allowed to dry out at all before I got it into the soil, to try to trigger that root growth as fast as possible so it has the best chance. With the thicker-leaved varieties, I'm just going to swap out over here. This plant is one of my favorite plants, and I'll show you in a minute. I'm not actually sure what type of Hoya it is, because I literally found this just like a 4 or 5 leaf scrap of Hoya that was totally wilted, half dead it looked like. I found it on the floor in a warehouse, and I was like, oh, look, some garbage. I'm gonna take it home and see if I can root it up. And look at it now. It's huge and it's growing like crazy. And it's perfectly healthy. Even these older leaves, like this was the oldest leaf and it was totally shriveled. And you can even see some of the bending, the curling on the back. That was because it was in such poor condition. This leaf over here as well is, let me hold it up a little higher. It's really shriveled and bent and it's even cut up a little bit. That's because it was just this little scrap that fell down on the ground. And now it has 2 new growth points. No, it has 3 new growth points. One is actually coming straight up from the soil. Or from down there. Okay, anyway, I haven't really looked at him very much lately, but this plant is going nuts, basically. And this is why I love Hoyas, is because they are survivors, and it just really, really, really wanted to live. So with this one, what I did, I wasn't able to get it in soil right away. So I found this little shriveled up scrap. It had maybe 1/3 of the water that it normally would in the leaves to fluff them up, you know? And so it was really not doing well. I stuck it in a plastic bag with a little bit of like a splash of my water bottle in there because I was still at work and I couldn't just come home and baby it. And I just left it in that for a day or 2, I think, until I got to potting it up. And then I just dipped the end in rooting hormone and jammed it in the soil in this pot. That's all I did. And here we go. So the method works. Like, long story short. Now with those ones, I had enough stem to work with and I was able to cut it and push that down. So there was a little bit of stem to root up and shove in the pot. With this guy, this is a Hoya Cortesii. And if you look, let me find a good spot. Here's a good spot. So if you look at this, there are little root nodes coming off. Those are little adventitious roots. And those guys, this guy wants to climb a tree or go along the soil or something, and he's going to be sticking those roots in wherever he goes. And because this one has so much, like the cuttings that I got were probably a little more like this, where they have maybe like, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch between the leaf nodes. That's not really a lot of space to work with. You could start a plant by cutting it at every node and jamming that down in the soil. But instead, what I did is I laid these cuttings, they were only like this long, like maybe 3 nodes a piece. I laid them on the surface of the soil and I used T-shaped safety pins, T-shaped push pins to kind of pin them to the soil. So I would lay the stem along with the leaves facing up, and then I would use this push pin that was kind of like T-shaped, and I would push it down so the T would kind of press it onto the soil. And they took quite a while to root up, and as you can see, they're growing like crazy now. All of this growth over the edge, all of these are new growth points off of the main plant. And I was super pleased. This is also one of my favorites because I started it from just tiny little scraps of plant. I think I had 4 little tiny cuttings that I just put in there like that. And I even, you can see on the side of the pot, there's a little hole right there, like right by my finger. I don't know if you can see it, but those push pins I even jammed through the side of the pot just to ensure that there was contact between these little tiny root nodes and the soil. And then you want to keep the surface of the soil moist, because if that is the only place that the roots are contacting the soil, if they don't feel water, they're not going to try to go for it. So what you want them to do is say, oh, this is a good home. Let me root up here. And it worked. This was about a year ago that I got these little babies, and they probably took, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months to really start growing, and then they've just been going nuts. So those guys are super fun. Another way to root Hoyas is I'm going to move that out from in front of my face. This is just kind of the I have too many cuttings version. There is no drainage. So it's just a tub. So you do have to be careful with watering. You want to just give it a splash, let it settle in, pick it up and see if it's heavy. And again, you want to keep the soil moist. You don't want to drown these in a little puddle. And I'm gonna pull one up and see if we can show you. Here we go. So again, this is the way to do it if you're planning to take these out of here and pot them up individually. And again, this like goes against what I was saying earlier with the whole don't disturb the roots thing, because it is going to mess with that. But here's why. I don't know if that helps. You can see on these roots that they are actually attaching themselves to the individual elements in the soil there. My camera's not focusing. Anyway, so they are trying to grab onto the stuff because these guys, remember, they're climbing plants, and so they do want to climb up something, and their little root hairs, they don't just kind of like when you pull them out, they don't just let go of everything. They're gonna like cling on to it. So you do want to give them a nice chunky mix. You do want to make sure that, like, if you want to get this soil off, use a hose, use water to wash anything away. And if anything is still stuck on there, I recommend just leaving it. Now, I have heard of accounts of people saying that sphagnum moss will rot the roots if you leave it on and pot it up with it still attached. That's why I wouldn't use sphagnum moss, honestly, because the more you pull at those roots, the more you're damaging the little root hairs, and that's just gonna set you back. So this is a Carnosa Crimson Queen, and this whole tub is those. So I'm going to tuck him back in. Get my fingers a little dirty here. One other thing is that dirt under your fingernails, especially like garden soil, if you're a gardener, it's good for you. This is my crazy theory on why plant people are so happy, is because the microbes in soil will actually colonize us. Like, we are healthier if we've had our hands in the dirt, because we're going to get some of those soil microbes in our body, and those actually, like, a healthy gut can improve your mood. And so, like, if you're having issues with depression and all of this other stuff, you might want to just maybe try to start with a you know, go outside and dig in the dirt, you know, but I definitely understand that that's overwhelming, or maybe you don't have the space for it or something, but start with one little plant, see how it helps. But then probiotics is a good idea too. And sometimes medication and therapy and all of those things, because Lord knows 2020 is a bitch right now. And so right now I'm filming this. It's Friday. It's Tuesday number 4. We're still waiting on election results, and I don't know what this country is doing. But that's been the case for the past 4 years, and no matter who wins, we've got our work cut out for us. So anyway, go team, team all of us, because we all need to get on the same wavelength with everything and be kind to each other, and that means everybody. So yay plants, yay Hoya cuttings. I hope you have a fabulous day, and I think that's it for now. If you have any other questions about Hoya cuttings, like rooting them up and stuff, feel free to get in touch. The other thing that I just noticed, this guy, let me turn him around. Right up here, you can see some dead leaves. No, this cutting, he may be entirely dead, I can't tell. Oh yeah, look, one failure in this whole box. Like, I don't really often get failures. This one looks like it was trying to root up a little bit, but it wasn't down in the soil very well. And so that's one thing you want to be careful of. You want to make sure there's enough stem contact with the soil so it can actually root up. These ones just dried up, and once in a while with cuttings, one of the things that I'll tell folks often is, sorry, I'll stop messing. The lower leaves may shrivel and die. Don't take them off. This is especially true with some other plants. Aglaonemas are notorious for this. The lower leaves will shrivel up. The plant is using the water, pulling that water from those lower leaves into the plant so it can grow roots and so it can continue supporting the rest of the plant. And those lower leaves are the least biologically useful. And so that's actually really handy for the plant. It's like it carried a couple of water bottles with it, so that if there's a drought, it can just use that moisture and continue the growth. And so if you're rooting up any kind of plant, but especially things like aglaonemas, and you see those lower leaves go yellow, a lot of people might tell you that, like I've seen this all over the internet, that yellowing leaves waste a plant's energy and you should pull them off, but that is not true. And I think I've said it before. Yellowing leaves are, when they're the oldest leaves and they're yellowing and then shriveling and going brown, you want to leave those on there until they're totally brown and crispy and they just come off in your hand, because the plant is actively using that water to grow roots. And the faster it can grow roots, the more water it has available to it to grow roots, the faster it grows the roots, and then it'll be happy and rooted, and you're good. And then it won't do that anymore. So that's not a disease. It just means the plant is responding to a drought and trying to stay alive. And so it's doing what it should. Anyway, we're going to be done. Bye.